Ethan Miller had been in love with Sophie Bennett for 6 years, 4 months, and, if he let himself be honest, which he rarely did, approximately 11 days, ever since the night she'd shown up at his apartment at 2 a.m. after her father's funeral, because she said his was the only door that felt safe to knock on. He had never told her. He had built an entire architecture of self-restraint around that single fact. Brick by careful brick, because Sophie was his best friend Jason's little sister, because she'd been through a string of relationships that always seemed to leave her a little more guarded than the last one, because Ethan had decided, somewhere along the way, that being the steady, reliable presence in her life was worth more than risking it on a feeling she might not return. Tonight at Jason's wedding, wearing a rented tuxedo that fit slightly wrong in the shoulders, Ethan had told himself for what felt like the 1,000th time that tonight would be no different from any other night he'd spent quietly loving her from exactly one respectful step away. He was wrong within the first hour. Sophie found him near the edge of the reception tent, away from the band, nursing a glass of champagne he wasn't really drinking, watching the string lights sway gently in the evening breeze. She looked different tonight, not just because of the deep emerald dress that made her look like something out of an old film, but because there was a tension in her that Ethan had learned, over 6 years, to read like weather. "You've been avoiding me all night," she said, stopping directly in front of him, close enough that he caught the familiar scent of her perfume, the one she'd worn since college. "I have not," Ethan said, which was a lie, and they both knew it. "You have. You always do this thing, where you get quiet and disappear to the edges of rooms when something's bothering you." She studied his face with the particular sharpness that had always made him feel both completely seen and slightly terrified. "What's bothering you tonight, Ethan?" He almost told her. He almost said you. "It's always been you. For 6 years it's been you, and I don't know how to stand in a room with you in that dress and pretend I'm fine." Instead, he did what he always did and deflected with a small, careful smile. "Nothing. Just watching your brother make a fool of himself on the dance floor." Sophie's expression shifted, something behind her eyes going quieter, more deliberate. "I have to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to actually listen, instead of doing the thing where you turn everything into a joke." "Okay," Ethan said, and set his glass down, giving her his full attention, because that, at least, he had never had to fake with her. "I got the job in Seattle," Sophie said. "The research position I interviewed for last month. They called this morning. I start in 3 weeks." Ethan felt something drop through his chest, a familiar hollow sensation he recognized immediately as the specific grief of losing something he'd never let himself claim in the first place. "That's Sophie, that's amazing. You worked so hard for that." "It is amazing," she agreed, though her voice had gone tight. "It's everything I wanted professionally, and I keep waiting to feel purely happy about it. And instead, all I can think about is that in 3 weeks, I'm going to be 2,000 miles away from the person I actually want to be near. And I've spent so long being too scared to say that out loud that I almost let myself get on a plane without ever telling you." Ethan's heart was suddenly loud enough that he was certain she could hear it. "Sophie, let me finish, because if I stop now, I don't think I'll ever say it." Her hands came up, and before he understood what was happening, she'd taken hold of his tie, not roughly, but with a kind of trembling determination, pulling him half a step closer, close enough that he could see she was fighting back tears she refused to let fall. "I have loved you for years," Ethan quietly, stupidly. "I told myself it was one-sided, that you saw me as Jason's little sister and nothing more, and I let that story keep me safe because the alternative, telling you and being wrong, felt like it would break something. I couldn't survive losing, but I'm leaving in 3 weeks, and I am done being careful with something this important." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through it. "Catch me before someone else does, please, because if you don't say something right now, I'm going to walk onto that plane in 3 weeks and spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd just told you the truth at my brother's wedding instead of letting fear win one more time." For a long moment, Ethan couldn't speak at all. 6 years of careful, disciplined silence collapsed all at once, and what rose up in its place was something he'd been suppressing for so Long it felt almost unfamiliar in his chest. Pure, uncomplicated relief. "Sophie," he said finally, his hand coming up to cover hers where it still gripped his tie. "I have been in love with you since the night you knocked on my door at 2 in the morning, after your dad's funeral. I have loved you through every guy who wasn't good enough for you, through every late-night phone call I told myself was just friendship, through 6 years of standing exactly one respectful step away, because I was terrified that if I stepped closer and you didn't want me there, I'd lose the version of you I was allowed to have." His voice caught. "You're not the one who was too scared to say it. We both were. I just didn't have the courage to grab your tie." Sophie let out a laugh that was half sob, her tears finally spilling over, and Ethan reached up to brush one away with his thumb, his hand lingering against her cheek in a way it never had before. 6 years, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. 6 years of both of us being idiots. "Come to Seattle," Ethan said suddenly, the words arriving fully formed, more certain than anything he'd said in years. "Not, I don't mean I'll follow you there tomorrow like some grand gesture in a movie. I mean I want to figure out what this actually is. Together in person, not across 2,000 miles of maybes. I have savings. I can work remotely for at least a while. I'm not letting 6 years of loving you turn into a long distance, almost when I finally get the chance to do something about it." Sophie stared at him, something breaking open in her expression, joy this time instead of fear. "You'd actually do that?" "I have spent 6 years being careful," Ethan said, and pulled her the rest of the way in, his forehead resting against hers, their breath mingling in the space between them. "I am done being careful, Sophie Bennett. Catch you before someone else does? I'm not letting you go at all." The kiss that followed was 6 years overdue, unhurried despite everything, the kind of kiss that rewrites the memory of every moment that came before it. Somewhere behind them the band kept playing. The string lights kept swaying. And Jason, catching sight of his best friend and his little sister, wrapped in each other's arms at the edge of his own wedding reception, simply smiled and let them have the moment, unbothered, unsurprised, like some part of him had been waiting 6 years for exactly this. They left the reception together an hour later, hand in hand, already talking through logistics and moving boxes and flights to Seattle with the giddy, disbelieving energy of two people who had spent years circling, something they finally had the courage to claim. Ethan Miller had spent 6 years being the reliable, steady presence, one respectful step away from the woman he loved. Tonight he closed that distance for good, and he had no intention of ever stepping back.